The train whistle screamed across the Arizona desert like a dying animal. And Helen Vasquez knew in that moment her life would never be the same as she clutched the letter that had brought her across a continent to marry a man she had never met. The year was 1883, and El Dorado Canyon was nothing more than a collection of weathered buildings clinging to existence in the harsh Arizona Territory landscape. Helen's hands trembled as she folded the letter one more time, the paper soft from countless readings during her journey from Philadelphia. The words swam before her eyes now, made blurry by tears she could no longer hold back. Her intended husband, Marcus Thornhill, had written such beautiful promises in his correspondence over the past 6 months. But the telegram that had found her at the last station before El Dorado Canyon told a different story entirely. Marcus Thornhill was dead, kicked in the head by a horse 3 days ago. The telegram was brief, impersonal, signed by someone named Sheriff Cooper. No condolences, no instructions, just the bare facts delivered like a slap across the face. Helen had spent the last leg of her journey trying to decide what to do. She had no money for a return ticket. She had sold everything she owned to make this trip west, burning every bridge in Philadelphia to escape a life that had become unbearable after her parents died, and her aunt's family made it clear she was an unwanted burden. 22 years old with nowhere to go forward and no way to go back, she felt the weight of her circumstances crushing down on her shoulders as the train pulled into the station. The platform was rough-hewn wood, sun-bleached and splintered. A handful of people waited in the afternoon heat, their faces shadowed by wide-brimmed hats. Helen gathered her 2 carpetbags, straightened her traveling dress as best she could, and stepped down from the train car. The moment her boots touched the platform, the reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave, and the tears she had been fighting broke free. She stood there crying, clutching her bags, completely lost in a strange place with no plan and no hope. The other passengers moved around her. The conductor called out something she could not hear over the roaring in her ears, and the hot Arizona wind dried the tears on her cheeks almost as fast as they fell. "Miss," the voice was deep, concerned, cutting through her panic. Helen looked up through her tears at the man who had spoken. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of whiskey in the sunlight. He wore dusty work clothes, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, worn denim pants and scuffed leather boots. A cowboy hat shaded his face, and there was something in his expression that made Helen want to trust him even though every sensible part of her brain screamed caution. "Miss, are you all right?" he asked again, his voice gentle despite his rugged appearance. Helen tried to speak, but only a sob came out. She shook her head, unable to form words. The cowboy stepped closer, his movements slow and careful like he was approaching a spooked horse. "My name is Ethan Pierce. I work at the Triple Bar Ranch outside town. You look like you could use some help." Helen managed to choke out, "I do not know what to do." "That is all right," Ethan said softly. "Why do not we get you out of this sun first? There is a bench over there in the shade. Can you walk that far?" Helen nodded, grateful for someone taking charge even in this small way. Ethan picked up her bags without asking, and she followed him to a bench under the overhang of the station building. He set her bags down carefully and waited, standing a respectful distance away with his hat now in his hands. "Take your time," he said. "But if you are in some kind of trouble, maybe I can help. This is not the kind of town where a lady should be alone and crying on the train platform." Something in his voice, some genuine kindness in his tone, made Helen believe him. She wiped at her face with her handkerchief and took a shaky breath. "Tell me everything," Ethan said, settling onto the bench beside her but leaving proper space between them. "I am listening." And so Helen told him. The words spilled out in a rush. Everything from her parents' death from cholera 2 years ago to her difficult life with her aunt and uncle in Philadelphia. Their 3 sons who looked at her in ways that made her skin crawl. The decision to answer Marcus Thornhill's advertisement for a mail-order bride. The months of letters and growing hope. And finally the telegram that shattered everything. She told him about having no money for a return ticket, no family who would take her back, no plan at all. Ethan listened to every word without interrupting. His eyes stayed on her face, and she could see him thinking, processing, understanding. When she finally ran out of words and sat there exhausted from the telling, he was quiet for a long moment. "I knew Marcus," Ethan said finally. "Not well, but enough to say hello when we passed in town. He seemed like a decent enough fellow. I am sorry for your loss, even if you never got the chance to meet him properly." "I do not know what I lost," Helen admitted. "He could have been terrible, he could have been wonderful, I will never know, but now I am here with nothing." "That is not entirely true," Ethan said slowly, like he was working through an idea as he spoke. "You have those bags, whatever is in them. You have yourself, and from what you have told me, you have courage enough to cross a continent for a new life. That is not nothing." "But what am I supposed to do?" Helen asked, hearing the desperation in her own voice. "I have maybe $5 to my name. I cannot even afford a hotel room for more than a night or two." Ethan was quiet again, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, he looked at her directly. "The Triple Bar Ranch where I work, the owner is a widow named Martha Dunham. She is tough as nails but fair, and she has been saying for months that she needs help with the house now that her arthritis is getting bad. Cooking, cleaning, mending, that sort of thing. It would not be charity. You would work for your room and board and a small wage. It would give you time to figure out what you want to do next." Hope flickered in Helen's chest, but caution tempered it. "Why would you help me? You do not know me at all." "That is true," Ethan acknowledged. "But my mother always taught me that when you see someone in need and you have the means to help, you do it. Besides, Martha really does need the help and you need a place to land. Seems like it could work out for everyone. What if she says no?" "Then we will figure out something else," Ethan said with a confidence that made Helen almost believe things might actually work out. "But let me talk to her first. The ranch is about an hour's ride from town. I came in to pick up supplies and I need to finish that before we head back." "Are you hungry?" Helen realized she had not eaten since early morning and it was now mid-afternoon. She nodded. "There is a decent restaurant across the street. Let me buy you some lunch while you collect yourself. Then I will finish my errands and we can head out to the ranch before dark." "I cannot let you pay for my meal," Helen protested, though her stomach growled at the mere mention of food. "Consider it an advance on your wages," Ethan said with a slight smile. "If Martha agrees to hire you, you can pay me back from your first month's pay. If she does not agree, then it is just lunch. I can afford that much." Helen found herself agreeing because she had no better options, and because there was something about Ethan Pierce that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since before her parents died. They crossed the dusty street to a small restaurant with faded curtains in the windows. The inside was dim and relatively cool, a relief from the relentless Arizona heat. The proprietor, a heavy-set woman with gray hair pinned back in a no-nonsense bun, nodded at Ethan. "The usual, please, Mrs. Patterson, and whatever this lady would like. She is new in town." Mrs. Patterson's sharp eyes took in Helen's tear-stained face and rumpled traveling clothes. Her expression softened. "You look like you have had a rough day, dear. The beef stew is good today and I have fresh bread." "That sounds wonderful," Helen said quietly. They sat at a small table near the window. Ethan removed his hat and set it on an empty chair. In the better light, Helen could see he was probably in his mid to late 20s, with dark brown hair that needed a trim and a strong, weathered face that spoke of years working outdoors. There was a scar through his left eyebrow, a thin white line that gave him a slightly roguish appearance. "How long have you worked at the Triple Bar?" Helen asked, needing to fill the silence with something other than her own anxious thoughts. "Going on 5 years now," Ethan replied. "I started out as just a regular ranch hand, but I have worked my way up to foreman. Martha Dunham is tough but fair. Her husband died about 7 years back, and she has been running the place on her own ever since. She has a son, but he moved to California to try his luck in what was left of the gold rush. He writes occasionally, but has made it clear he is not coming back. That must be hard for her." "It is, but she does not complain. Martha is not the complaining type. She just gets on with what needs doing." Mrs. Patterson brought their food, and Helen realized just how hungry she was. The stew was rich and flavorful, the bread still warm from the oven. For a few minutes, they ate in companionable silence. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said after a while. "Of course. In all those letters with Marcus Thornhill, did he tell you much about what life is like out here?" Helen considered the question. "He told me it was hard work, but that the land had a beauty to it once you learned to see it. He told me about the sunsets and the way the canyon looked in the morning light. He made it sound lonely but also free." "That is about right," Ethan said. "It is not an easy life, especially for women used to city comforts. There is no theater here, no fancy shops, no concerts or social clubs. Water is precious, and the heat in summer can be unbearable. In winter, the nights get cold enough to freeze water solid. Dust gets into everything, and the nearest doctor is a day's ride away in Prescott." "Are you trying to scare me off?" Helen asked, but there was no accusation in her tone, only curiosity. "No," Ethan said seriously. "I am trying to make sure you know what you are getting into. If you take this job with Martha, if you decide to stay in El Dorado Canyon, it is going to be different from anything you have known in Philadelphia. I just want you to have your eyes open." "I appreciate that," Helen said, "but the truth is, I have nothing to go back to. My life in Philadelphia was not easy either. Different hardships, maybe, but hardships all the same. At least here, I have a chance to build something of my own." Ethan nodded slowly. "That is a good way to look at it." They finished their meal, and Ethan paid Mrs. Patterson. Then he left Helen at the restaurant with her bags while he finished loading the wagon with supplies from the general store. Helen used the time to wash her face properly and pin up her dark hair, which had come loose during her crying. She looked at herself in the small mirror Mrs. Patterson let her use and barely recognized the woman looking back. There were shadows under her brown eyes, and her skin was pale despite the journey. But there was also something else there now, a determination that had not been present when she stepped off the train. When Ethan returned with the loaded wagon, Helen was ready. He helped her up onto the bench seat and loaded her bags in the back with the supplies. The wagon lurched into motion, and El Dorado Canyon fell away behind them as they headed into the desert landscape. The land was nothing like Pennsylvania. Red rock formations jutted up from the earth like ancient monuments. Scrubby vegetation clung to life wherever it could find purchase. In the distance, mountains rose up in layers of purple and blue. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "You were right," Helen said softly. "It is beautiful in its own way." Ethan glanced at her. "You should see it after a rare rain. The whole desert comes alive with flowers, colors you would not believe could exist out here. Lasts maybe a week before the heat burns it all away again, but for that brief time, It is like something out of a dream." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking, the horses' hooves steady on the packed earth road. Helen found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. He handled the reins with easy competence, his body swaying with the motion of the wagon. There was something comforting about his presence, a quiet strength that asked nothing of her. "Can I ask you something now?" Helen ventured. "Fair is fair," Ethan replied. "Why are you not married? You seem like the kind of man who would have a wife and family by now." Ethan was quiet for so long that Helen thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke. "I was engaged once. Her name was Sarah. We grew up together in Texas, and everyone always assumed we would marry. But when I told her I wanted to come west, to see what was beyond the small town where we had both been born, she gave me an ultimatum. Stay and settle down with her father's business or go and lose her. I chose to go. Do you regret it?" "Sometimes," Ethan admitted, "but mostly no. I realized that if she really loved me, she would have wanted me to follow my dreams, or at least been willing to compromise. And if I really loved her the way a man should love the woman he is going to marry, I would not have been able to leave. So maybe it was for the best." "That was 6 years ago, and I have not been back to Texas since. Do you miss it? Your home?" "Not as much as I probably should. My parents died when I was young. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I was raised by my uncle, and he was not a kind man. When I was old enough to make my own way, I did. The army for a couple years, then various ranch jobs as I moved west. I ended up here, and it felt right to stay." Helen understood that feeling of not being able to go back, of needing to move forward even when the path ahead was uncertain. In that moment, she felt a kinship with this stranger who had shown her such unexpected kindness. The Triple Bar Ranch came into view as the sun touched the horizon. It was larger than Helen had expected. A main house built of adobe and wood, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals where horses moved like shadows in the fading light. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, and warm light glowed in the windows. Ethan pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. "Wait here a moment. Let me talk to Martha first." Helen nodded, her stomach tight with nerves. Everything depended on this woman she had never met agreeing to give her a chance. She watched as Ethan knocked on the door and then disappeared inside. The minutes stretched out. Helen could hear voices inside but could not make out the words. She studied the ranch, trying to imagine herself living here, working here. It was so different from the narrow row house in Philadelphia, where she had lived with her aunt's family. So different from anything she had known. The door opened, and Ethan emerged followed by a woman who could only be Martha Dunham. She was probably in her early 50s, with iron-gray hair pulled back severely from a face that had been beautiful once and was still striking now. She walked with a slight limp, arthritis evident in the careful way she moved, but her eyes were sharp and assessing as they fixed on Helen. "Come down from there, girl," Martha called out. "Let me get a look at you." Helen climbed down from the wagon, grateful when Ethan offered his hand to steady her. She walked over to Martha and tried not to fidget under that penetrating stare. "Ethan tells me you came west to marry Marcus Thornhill and found out when you arrived that he had died," Martha said bluntly. "That true?" "Yes, madam. And you have no money to go back east and no family who wants you there anyway." "That is correct, madam." Heat rose in Helen's cheeks at having her desperate situation laid out so plainly. "Can you cook?" "Yes, madam. My mother taught me, and I have been cooking for my aunt's family for the past 2 years. Can you clean, do laundry, mend clothes, all those domestic tasks?" "Yes, madam." "Can you read and write?" "Yes, madam. My father was a schoolteacher. He made sure I had an education." Martha nodded slowly. I will be honest with you, Miss Vasquez, I need help. My hands are not what they used to be, and running this ranch does not leave me much time for keeping house the way I would like. But I am not a charity. If you work for me, I expect you to actually work. Room and board plus $15 a month to start. If you prove yourself, we can discuss a raise after 3 months. You will have your own room, Sundays off except for cooking breakfast and dinner, and you eat the same food as everyone else. No special treatment. What do you say? $15 a month was more than Helen had expected. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to save, enough to give her options eventually. I accept, madam, thank you. Do not thank me yet. You have not seen how much work there is to do. Ethan, help her get settled in the spare room off the kitchen. Miss Vasquez, you can start tomorrow morning. Breakfast is at 5:30. Martha turned and limped back into the house without waiting for a response. Ethan grinned at Helen. That went well. Martha only gets that formal when she is trying not to show she is pleased about something. Helen felt weak with relief. She had a job, a place to live, a chance to figure out her next steps. It was more than she had dared hope for just a few hours ago. Ethan showed her to her room, carrying her bags for her. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the barn. After months of sleeping on her aunt's lumpy sofa in the parlor, it looked like luxury to Helen. There is water in the pitcher, and I will bring more hot water in a bit so you can wash up properly, Ethan said. Dinner is at 7. Someone will come get you. Ethan, Helen said as he turned to leave, thank you for everything. I do not know what I would have done if you had not been at that train station. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. I am glad I was there, he said simply. Then he left, closing the door quietly behind him. Helen sank onto the bed and allowed herself to finally, truly breathe. She had made it. She was not safe yet, not really, but she had a foothold, a place to start from. She thought about Marcus Thornhill, the man she had agreed to marry sight unseen. She felt sad that he had died so young, but she could not grieve him the way a real fiancé would have. He had been a collection of words on paper, a hope for a better future, but not a real person to her. Not the way Ethan Pierce had become real in just a few hours. Ethan. Helen found herself thinking about him as she unpacked her few belongings. He had been so kind, so willing to help without asking for anything in return. In her experience, men always wanted something, but Ethan had just helped. She wondered if all men were like that out here in the West, or if she had just been extraordinarily lucky. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. A young Mexican man stood there with a bucket of hot water. Good evening, miss. I am Diego. I work here at the ranch. Ethan said you might need this. Thank you, Diego. Helen took the bucket and poured it carefully into the basin on the washstand. The warm water felt like heaven as she washed away the dust and grime of travel. She changed into a clean dress, a simple dark blue calico, and pinned her hair up properly. By the time another knock announced dinner, she felt almost human again. The dining room was attached to the kitchen, a large space with a heavy wooden table that could easily seat 10 people. Martha sat at the head of the table with Ethan on her right. 3 other ranch hands were present, including Diego. They all stood when Helen entered, a courtesy she had not expected. Sit there, Martha indicated a chair on her left. These are my ranch hands. You have met Ethan and Diego. That is Robert. He has been with me for 3 years, and that is young Tom. He just started last month. Gentlemen, this is Miss Helen Vasquez. She will be working as my housekeeper starting tomorrow. I expect you all to treat her with respect. The men mumbled their greetings and sat back down. Helen noticed that Robert was probably in his 40s, weathered and quiet. Tom could not have been more than 18, with red hair and freckles and an air of eager friendliness. Dinner was beef, beans, potatoes, and cornbread. It was simple but filling. The men ate with the single-minded focus of people who worked hard physically. Martha asked Ethan about the supplies he had picked up, and they discussed ranch business. Helen ate quietly, listening, getting a sense of the rhythm of this place. After dinner, the men dispersed to the bunkhouse. Martha showed Helen around the kitchen, pointing out where things were kept. "I usually do breakfast and dinner myself. The men make their own lunch or take something with them if they are working far from the house. Starting tomorrow, I would appreciate it if you could take over breakfast and dinner. I will help at first until you know how everyone likes things and how much to make." "Of course," Helen said. "What time should I get up?" 5 o'clock should give you enough time." "I will be up then too, so I can show you the routine." They said goodnight, and Helen returned to her small room. She changed into her nightgown and lay in the narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night. Horses moving in the corrals, the distant howl of a coyote, the wind rustling through the scrub brush. It was so different from Philadelphia's city sounds that it felt like being on another planet. Sleep came slowly, her mind churning with everything that had happened. Just this morning she had still been on the train, still believing she was going to meet her future husband. Now that man was dead, and she was lying in a strange bed in Arizona territory, employed as a housekeeper on a ranch, her future completely uncertain. And through it all, one thought kept returning. The way Ethan Pierce had looked at her with such kindness, such genuine concern. She had not been looked at like that in a very long time. The next morning, Helen woke to darkness and the sound of Martha moving around in the kitchen. She dressed quickly and joined the older woman, who showed her how to get the stove going properly, where the coffee supplies were kept, how much bacon to fry, how many eggs to crack into the big iron skillet. It was familiar work, comforting in its routine. The men filed in promptly at 5:30, looking half asleep but ready for the day. They ate quickly, thanked Martha and Helen, and headed out to their various tasks. Ethan was the last to leave. He caught Helen's eye and gave her a small smile. "Good breakfast," he said. "Welcome to the Triple Bar." Then he was gone, and Helen was left with a strange fluttering feeling in her chest that she tried to ignore as she helped Martha clean up. The days fell into a rhythm. Helen woke before dawn, helped prepare breakfast, cleaned the kitchen, did laundry on Mondays, scrubbed floors, mended clothes, helped Martha with dinner preparations, served dinner, cleaned up again, and fell into bed exhausted. It was hard work, but it was honest work, and she was good at it. Martha said little, but Helen noticed that the older woman's movements became easier, that she seemed less tense, that she smiled more often as the house regained a sense of order and cleanliness it had been lacking. The ranch hands were respectful, if not particularly chatty. Robert kept to himself. Young Tom was friendly in a puppyish way that reminded Helen of her youngest cousin back in Philadelphia. Diego was polite and helpful, often volunteering to carry heavy things for her or help with tasks that required more strength than she possessed. And then there was Ethan. Helen found herself watching for him, listening for his voice, aware of him in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. He was often out on the range during the day, managing the cattle and the other hands, but he came in for meals and sometimes in the evenings would sit on the porch, and Helen found excuses to be nearby. 2 weeks after Helen arrived at the Triple Bar, Martha sent her into town with a list of supplies they needed from the general store. Ethan drove her in the wagon, and Helen could not help but remember their first journey together from the train station to the ranch. "You have settled in well," Ethan observed as they rattled along the road. Martha says she does not know how she managed without you. She is being kind, Helen said, but I am glad to be useful. It is more than that. You have brought something to the ranch that has been missing. It feels more like a home now instead of just a place where people work. Helen was not sure how to respond to that. She changed the subject. Have you heard anything more about Marcus Thornhill, about what will happen to his property? I asked around, Ethan said. Apparently he had some distant cousins back east. The property will probably go to them eventually, once the legal matters are sorted out. Why do you ask? I suppose I was just curious. He was meant to be my future in a way. It feels strange that he is just gone and life goes on as if he never existed. Everyone leaves some mark, Ethan said quietly. Maybe his mark was bringing you here, even if not in the way he intended. Helen thought about that. It was a generous way to look at it. Do you believe in fate? She asked. I do not know, Ethan admitted. I think we make choices and those choices have consequences, and sometimes those consequences lead us to places we never expected. Is that fate or just life? I am not smart enough to say. They reached El Dorado Canyon, and Ethan helped her down from the wagon. The general store was bigger than it had looked from the outside on her first day, packed with goods of every description. The proprietor, Mr. Gaines, was a short man with spectacles and a businesslike manner. He greeted Ethan by name and looked at Helen with undisguised curiosity. This is Miss Vasquez, Ethan said. She is working for Martha Dunham now. She will be coming in occasionally to pick up supplies. Pleased to meet you, Miss Vasquez, Mr. Gaines said. Any friend of the Triple Bar is welcome here. Helen handed over Martha's list, and Mr. Gaines bustled around gathering items. While they waited, Helen looked around the store. There were bolts of fabric, canned goods, tools, rope, saddles, boots, hats, and 100 other things. A small section near the back had books, and Helen drifted over to look at the titles. You like to read? Ethan asked, following her. I used to, Helen said. I have not had much time for it lately, but yes. My father had a wonderful library. I read everything I could get my hands on as a girl. What kind of books? Everything. Novels, poetry, history, philosophy. I was not particular. I just loved the way books could take you somewhere else, show you different lives, different possibilities. Ethan picked up a volume, a collection of poems by Walt Whitman. Martha has some books at the ranch. She does not read much anymore because her eyes bother her, but she used to be quite the reader. I bet she would let you borrow from her collection if you asked. Really? Helen felt a spark of excitement. Books had been one of the great pleasures of her life before, and she had not realized how much she missed them. Really? I will mention it to her if you like. Mr. Gaines called out that the order was ready. Ethan paid him from the money Martha had provided and loaded the supplies into the wagon. On impulse, Helen asked Mr. Gaines how much the Whitman collection cost. It was $1.50, more than she should spend, but she had received her first week's wages and decided it was worth it. She could read in the evenings before bed, a small luxury that would make life feel less like pure drudgery. On the way back to the ranch, with the book carefully wrapped in brown paper on her lap, Helen felt something shift inside her. She was making a life here. It was not the life she had imagined when she had agreed to marry Marcus Thornhill, but it was a life nonetheless. She had a job she was good at, a safe place to sleep, enough to eat, and the promise of small pleasures like books. It was more than many people had, and she had Ethan. Or rather, she had his friendship, his kindness, his occasional company. She told herself that was enough, that she should not hope for more, but her heart was not particularly good at listening to reason. That evening, as Helen was finishing up the dinner dishes, Martha came into the kitchen and sat down heavily at the table. Pour us both some coffee and sit with me a minute, the older woman said. Helen did as instructed, curious. Martha was not given to casual conversation. "I have been watching you," Martha said without preamble. "You work hard, you do not complain, and you are good with the men. They respect you, which is not always easy to earn." "Thank you, madam. I also have eyes in my head, and I am not so old that I have forgotten what it is like to be a young woman. You watch Ethan the way I used to watch my late husband before we were married." Helen felt her face flame. "I am sorry. I did not mean to be inappropriate." "Oh, hush, there is nothing inappropriate about it. Ethan is a good man, one of the best I have ever known. He has been like a son to me these past years. If you have feelings for him, that is natural. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I do not know what you mean." Martha gave her a look that said she was not fooled. "Out here, we do not have time for the kind of long courtships and social dancing around that you might be used to in the city. Life is too short and too hard. If you care for someone, you find a way to let them know. If they feel the same, you figure out how to make it work. If they do not, at least you know and can move on. But I barely know him, and he is my employer in a way. It would not be proper." "Proper," Martha snorted. "I came west with my husband when I was 17 years old. I had known him for 6 weeks when we married. We had 35 good years together before a heart attack took him from me. My point is, proper is whatever works for the people involved. Ethan is not your employer, I am. And I am telling you that if something were to develop between you two, I would not object. In fact, I would be happy about it. Ethan has been alone too long, and you deserve more than to spend your whole life keeping house for an old woman." Helen did not know what to say. Martha stood up, wincing as her arthritis protested. "Think about it, but do not think too long. Life has a way of passing by while you are busy being careful." After Martha left, Helen sat alone in the kitchen with her cooling coffee. Was it really so obvious? Did Ethan know? The thought mortified her, but it also sent a thrill through her. What if Martha was right? What if she could have more than just a safe place to work? She went to bed that night with her mind full of possibilities, dangerous and wonderful in equal measure. Sunday was Helen's day off, and she woke later than usual, luxuriating in the rare chance to sleep past dawn. She dressed and went to the kitchen to make breakfast, her one required task of the day. The ranch was quiet, most of the hands sleeping in or tending to small personal tasks. Ethan was sitting on the porch when she came out after breakfast, working oil into a saddle with steady, practiced movements. "Morning," he said, looking up with a smile. "Sleep well." "Very well, thank you." Helen hesitated, Martha's words echoing in her mind. "What do you usually do on Sundays?" "Depends. Catch up on mending tack, write letters occasionally, read if I have something to read. Sometimes I ride out just to see the country without having to work while I do it." "Why?" "I was wondering if you might show me around the area. I have been here 3 weeks, and I have barely seen anything beyond the ranch and the one road to town." Ethan's face lit up. "I would love to. Do you ride?" "I used to, as a girl. It has been years, though. We will go easy. Give me half an hour to saddle a couple of horses." Helen changed into her most practical dress and met Ethan at the barn. He had prepared a gentle mare for her and his own larger horse. He helped her mount, and she was relieved to find that the skills came back more easily than she had expected. They set out at a walk, heading away from the ranch buildings toward the open desert. Ethan was a patient guide, pointing out various plants and explaining what the animals used them for, showing her the best views, telling her the history of the area as he understood it. The canyon itself was a spectacular gash in the earth, with the Colorado River running through it far below. The scale of it was almost incomprehensible to Helen, who had spent her life surrounded by buildings and people. They stopped to rest the horses near a spot where a natural spring created a small pool of clear water. Trees grew here, providing shade, and it felt like a secret oasis in the middle of the harsh landscape. Ethan helped Helen down from her horse, and they sat on the rocks near the water. "Thank you for this," Helen said. "It is so beautiful. I am beginning to understand what Marcus meant in his letters about the land having its own beauty." "It gets in your blood," Ethan agreed. "I have been to cities, seen grand buildings and crowded streets. There is something impressive about what people can build. But this," he gestured at the landscape around them, "this makes me feel connected to something bigger. Does that make sense?" "It does." Helen trailed her fingers in the cool water of the spring. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever think about settling down, building something permanent instead of just working for someone else?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I have been saving money. I have enough now to buy some land, start my own small operation. But it is a big step, going from working for someone to being your own boss. You have to have enough capital to survive the bad years, and you have to be able to do everything yourself or be able to afford to hire help. I am not quite there yet, but maybe in another year or two." "What kind of operation would you want?" "Something modest. Not trying to compete with the big outfits. Maybe a couple hundred head of cattle, some horses. A good house, a barn, a few outbuildings. Room to grow if things go well. Land near water, since that is the most valuable thing out here." He paused, then added quietly, "And maybe a family eventually. If I could find the right woman who could tolerate my stubborn nature and love this land the way I do." Helen's heart beat faster. Was he talking in general terms, or was there a message for her in those words? She took a breath, thinking of Martha's advice about not being too careful. "I think any woman would be lucky to build a life with you, Ethan Pierce." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes took her breath away. "Helen, I need to tell you something. I have been trying not to say anything because you have been through so much, and you need time to settle and figure out what you want. But I am not good at pretending, and Martha told me last night that I was being a fool for not speaking up." "Martha talks to you about me." "Martha talks to me about everything. She is like a mother to me. She said I should tell you how I feel, and if you do not feel the same way, at least I would know and could stop mooning around like a lovesick calf." "And how do you feel?" Helen whispered. "I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the moment I saw you crying on that train platform. You looked so lost, and I just wanted to make things better for you. And then I got to know you, got to see how strong you are, how hard you work, how kind you are to everyone around you. You laugh at Tom's terrible jokes, and you are patient with Robert even though he can be prickly. You have made the ranch feel like a home. You have made me feel like maybe I could have a home, a real home, not just a place I work." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. "I know it is too soon. I know you have only been here a few weeks and you came west expecting to marry someone else. But I am falling in love with you, Helen, and I needed you to know." Helen felt tears prick her eyes, but these were nothing like the tears she had cried on the train platform. These were tears of relief, of joy, of something that felt almost too good to be true. "I thought I was being foolish," she said, her voice shaking. "I thought it was too soon, that you could never be interested in someone like me, someone who came west as a mail-order bride and ended up working as a housekeeper." "Someone like you," Ethan repeated incredulously. "Helen, you are the bravest person I know. You crossed a continent to make a new life. When that fell apart, you did not crumble. You found a way forward. You work harder than anyone I have ever met, and you do it with grace and without complaint. You are beautiful and smart and kind. I am the one who wonders why you would ever look twice at a cowboy who smells like horse and dust most of the time." Helen laughed through her tears. I happen to like the way you smell. Ethan grinned, then his expression turned serious again. I am not proposing marriage right now. I know that would be too much, too fast, but I would like to court you properly if you will let me. I would like the chance to show you what kind of life we could build together. And if you decide I am not what you want, I will accept that and we will still be friends. But I had to ask. I had to try. Yes, Helen said, the word tumbling out before she could second-guess herself. Yes, I want that. I want to see where this goes. I am falling in love with you too, Ethan. I have been trying not to because it seemed too fast, too unlikely, but my heart does not seem to care about logic. Ethan's smile was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture that was both old-fashioned and incredibly sweet. We will take it slow, he promised. We will do this right. They sat by the spring for another hour, talking about everything and nothing. Ethan told her more about his childhood in Texas, the hard years after his parents died. Helen told him about her father's love of learning, her mother's gentle nature, the pain of losing them both and then being treated like a burden by the only family she had left. They discovered shared tastes in books and music, similar senses of humor, compatible views on life. When they finally rode back to the ranch, everything looked different to Helen. This was not just the place where she worked anymore. This was the place where she might build a life, a real life, with a man who saw her for who she truly was and loved her anyway. Martha took one look at them when they returned and smiled knowingly. "Took you long enough," was all she said, but her eyes were warm. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest Helen had ever known. She and Ethan were careful to maintain propriety. He did not visit her room, and they were never alone in the house. But they found time to be together in acceptable ways. He taught her more about riding, and they took long rides on Sunday afternoons. They sat together on the porch in the evenings, talking while he did leather work, or she did mending. Sometimes he read aloud to her from Martha's collection of books, his deep voice bringing the words to life. The other ranch hands noticed but said nothing, though young Tom grinned whenever he saw them together and Diego gave Helen an approving nod. Robert remained taciturn, but even he seemed to soften slightly. Martha watched it all with satisfaction. One evening, about 2 months after Helen had arrived at the Triple Bar, Martha asked her to sit down after dinner. "I have a proposition for you," the older woman said. "My son wrote from California. He is getting married, and he wants me to come out for the wedding. It is a month from now, and I will be gone for at least 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. "Congratulations," Helen said, surprised. "That is wonderful news." "It is, though I am not looking forward to that journey at my age, but that is not the point. The point is that I need someone to manage the house while I am gone. That would be you, obviously. But I also need someone I trust to keep an eye on the ranch business, make sure the hands are doing what they should, handle any problems that come up. That is usually Ethan's job as foreman, but he cannot be everywhere at once. I need my foreman and my housekeeper to work together closely, which means you two would be here together without me as a chaperone. That will cause talk in town if people find out." Helen felt her face heat. "I understand your concern. I am not concerned about what you two would do. I trust you both. I am concerned about your reputations. This is a small community and gossip spreads fast. People know you are courting, and that is fine. But you two living here alone while I am gone, that is the kind of thing small minds make into a scandal." Martha paused, studying Helen's face. "So here is my proposition. Marry Ethan before I leave. A proper wedding, nothing hurried or shameful. Do it right. Then there is no scandal, just a married couple managing a ranch for a couple of months while the owner is away. When I come back, I will sign over a portion of the ranch to you two as a wedding present. 20 acres with water rights, enough to start your own operation while still working for me. In a few years, you can decide if you want to go out entirely on your own or stay on here." Helen stared at her, unable to process what she was hearing. "You would give us land. I have no one else to leave this ranch to. My son has made it clear he wants no part of it. I am not young, and my health is not what it used to be. I would rather see this place go to people who love it and will care for it properly. You and Ethan have both proven yourselves. This way, I know the triple bar will continue after I am gone, and you too will have the start you need for your own future." Martha leaned forward. "But I need an answer soon. I leave in 3 weeks. That is not a lot of time to plan a wedding, but it can be done if you are willing." "I need to talk to Ethan," Helen managed to say. "Of course. He is probably out in the barn. Go talk to him now. I can finish cleaning up the kitchen tonight." Helen practically ran to the barn. She found Ethan checking on a horse that had thrown a shoe earlier in the day. "Ethan, I need to talk to you." He heard the urgency in her voice and immediately gave her his full attention. Helen told him everything Martha had said, the words tumbling out in a rush. When she finished, Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "That is a lot," he said finally. "I know. I told her I needed to talk to you. If it is too fast, if you are not ready, I understand. We can tell her no." "Do you want to marry me?" Ethan asked, his eyes searching hers. Helen took a breath. 3 months ago, she had been on a train to marry a stranger. Now she was standing in a barn in Arizona territory, being asked by a man she loved if she wanted to marry him. Life was strange and unpredictable and sometimes, occasionally, wonderful. "Yes," she said. "I do. I love you, Ethan. I know it has only been 2 months, but I am more sure of this than I have been of anything in my life." Ethan closed the distance between them in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms. "I love you too. I have been trying to wait to give you time, but the truth is I would marry you tomorrow if I could. Martha's offer is more generous than I could have dreamed. If you are sure, if you really want this, then yes, let's do it. Let's get married." He kissed her then, and it was everything Helen had imagined and more. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably go tell Martha before I forget myself entirely and compromise your virtue in this barn." Helen laughed, giddy with happiness. That would be quite the scandal. They went back to the house hand in hand and found Martha sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, trying and failing to hide her anticipation. "Well," she demanded as soon as they walked in. "We are getting married," Ethan announced. "Thank you, Martha, for everything." Martha's eyes filled with tears, which she quickly blinked away. "Good, that is settled then. We have a lot to do and not much time to do it. Helen, you are going to need a proper dress. Ethan, you need to ride into town tomorrow and talk to Pastor Williams about doing the ceremony. I will start spreading the word. We will have it here at the ranch 2 weeks from today. That gives us time to prepare but does not push it too close to when I need to leave." The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Martha, for all her arthritis and complaints about her health, proved to be a formidable organizer. She arranged everything with military precision. Helen protested that they did not need a big fuss, but Martha was adamant. "You are only going to get married once, God willing. It should be done right." Mrs. Patterson from the restaurant offered to help with the food for the reception. Several women from town whom Helen had met only briefly volunteered to bring dishes. Mr. Gaines from the general store helped Helen pick out fabric for a dress, a beautiful cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery. Martha surprised Helen by revealing that she had been quite an accomplished seamstress in her younger days, and together they made the dress. working late into the evenings to get it finished in time. Ethan was rarely at the ranch during those 2 weeks. When he was not working, he was building. Helen was not allowed to see what he was working on. "It is a wedding present," was all he would say. "You will see it after the ceremony." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful, the Arizona sky a perfect, cloudless blue. Helen woke early, too excited and nervous to sleep. Martha helped her dress, pinning her dark hair up in an elaborate style and tucking wildflowers that Tom had gathered into the braids. The dress fit perfectly, and when Helen looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked happy. She looked like a bride. The ceremony was held in the yard between the main house and the barn. Pastor Williams from El Dorado Canyon had ridden out to perform the service. Chairs had been set up for the guests, though there were not many. Besides the ranch hands, a dozen or so people from town had made the journey. It was small, intimate, perfect. Ethan stood under an arch that Tom and Diego had built and decorated with more wildflowers and greenery. He wore new clothes, probably the first new clothes he had bought for himself in years. His hair was neatly trimmed and he was clean-shaven. But what took Helen's breath away was the look on his face when he saw her walking toward him. It was love and wonder and awe all mixed together. Martha walked Helen down the aisle, since there was no father to do it. When they reached Ethan, Martha placed Helen's hand in his and whispered, "Be happy, both of you." The ceremony was simple and traditional. They spoke their vows clearly, both of them meaning every word. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed Helen with such tenderness that several people in the small crowd made appreciative noises. The reception was held under canopies that had been set up to provide shade. There was food, music provided by Diego on a guitar, and dancing. Helen danced with Ethan, with Tom, with Robert, who was surprisingly graceful, and even with old Mr. Gaines from the general store. She talked with the women from town, who welcomed her warmly now that she was a married woman and not just a mail-order bride who had been abandoned by fate. As the afternoon wore on and the guests began to drift away, Ethan took Helen's hand. "I want to show you something." He led her away from the main house, past the barn, to a spot she had not really explored before. There, on a small rise with a view of the canyon in the distance, stood a new structure. It was small, just one room, but it was well built with a solid roof, real windows with glass, and a door that hung straight and true. Inside, there was a bed that Ethan had clearly made himself, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, shelves on the walls, and hooks for hanging clothes. It was sparse but clean and new and theirs. "I know it is not much," Ethan said, sounding nervous, "but I wanted us to have our own place, even though we are still living on the ranch. I built it on the 20 acres Martha is giving us. Eventually, we will build a bigger house, but for now, this can be home." Helen turned to him with tears streaming down her face. "It is perfect. It is the most perfect thing I have ever seen." That night, they made love for the first time in the bed Ethan had built in the house he had constructed for them, and Helen understood what it meant to truly belong somewhere, to someone. She had crossed a continent for a life that had fallen apart before it could begin, but she had found something better than she could have imagined. The next morning, Martha left for California. She had made arrangements with a neighbor's son to drive her to Prescott where she could catch a stage west. Before she left, she handed Ethan and Helen the deed to their 20 acres. "It is official," she said. "That land is yours and the water rights with it. Build something good there." They waved goodbye as the wagon pulled away, then turned to face their new life together. With Martha gone, Ethan and Helen had to manage the ranch together. It was hard work, harder than anything Helen had done before. She was up before dawn cooking for the ranch hands, then often rode out with Ethan to help with the cattle. She learned to spot signs of illness in the animals, how to mend fences, how to read the weather in the western sky. Her hands became calloused and her skin tanned despite her best efforts with bonnets and long sleeves. But she was happy. Ethan was a good husband, patient and loving and respectful. They worked together as partners, neither one of them the boss, both contributing what they could. In the evenings, they would return to their little house, exhausted but content, and Helen would think about how strange and wonderful life could be. 2 months after the wedding, Martha returned from California full of stories about her son's wedding and the strange, bustling city of San Francisco. She immediately noticed the changes in Helen, the new confidence in the way she carried herself, the easy way she and Ethan worked together. "Marriage agrees with you both," she observed with satisfaction. Life settled into a new normal. Ethan continued to work as foreman, but he and Helen spent their free time improving their own property. They built a small barn for the horses they were beginning to accumulate. They fenced off their land. Ethan bought a dozen head of cattle to start their own herd. Helen planted a garden in a spot where water from their creek could keep it alive, even in the Arizona heat. The following spring, Helen realized she was pregnant. She told Ethan one evening as they sat on the porch of their little house watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. "We are going to have a baby," she said simply. Ethan stared at her for a moment as the words sank in. Then he let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." Martha was thrilled when they told her. Finally, a child on this ranch again. It has been too quiet for too long. The pregnancy was difficult at times. The heat of summer was oppressive and Helen's body rebelled in various uncomfortable ways. But Ethan was attentive and caring, taking over more of the heavy work and insisting that Helen rest more than she thought necessary. The baby was due in December, and as the months passed and Helen's belly grew, the reality of becoming parents began to sink in. In late November, Helen went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting through a day and a night. Ethan stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement. Martha acted as midwife, her experience with animals and her few deliveries of human babies serving them well in the absence of a doctor. When the sun rose on the second day, Helen finally gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel James Pierce, Samuel after Helen's father and James after Ethan's. He was small and red-faced and loud, and Helen thought he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Ethan held his son with shaking hands, his eyes bright with tears he did not bother to hide. "Hello, Samuel," he whispered. "Welcome to the world." Being parents changed everything. The little house that had seemed cozy for two was cramped with a baby, but they made it work. Helen found reserves of energy she had not known she possessed, functioning on little sleep and seemingly endless patience. Ethan helped with everything, changing diapers and walking the floor with Samuel when he would not settle, never once complaining that it was women's work. Martha doted on the baby, knitting blankets and tiny clothes, always willing to take Samuel for a few hours so Helen could rest. Even the ranch hands softened around the baby. Tom was particularly besotted, making faces to get Samuel to smile and carving little wooden toys for him. As Samuel grew from infant to baby to toddler, Ethan and Helen continued to build their own operation. Their herd grew. They added on to their house, building a proper bedroom for themselves and a small room for Samuel. They built a larger barn. They saved money, planning for the future. When Samuel was 3 years old, Helen became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In the spring, she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose Martha Pierce, Rose for its beauty and Martha in honor of the woman who had given them so much. Rose was a completely different child from Samuel. Where he had been fussy and demanding, she was calm and content. She smiled easily and slept through the night almost from the beginning. Samuel adored his little sister, always wanting to help take care of her, bringing her toys and patting her head gently. The years passed, as years do. Samuel grew tall and strong like his father, learning to ride before he could properly walk, always wanting to be outdoors, always curious about how things worked. Rose was quieter but no less determined, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn streak. Martha's health began to decline as she moved into her 60s. She turned more and more of the ranch business over to Ethan and Helen. On a warm spring evening when Samuel was 7 and Rose was 4, Martha called them all to the main house. She had her lawyer there, a man from Prescott who had ridden out at her request. "I am not dying tomorrow," Martha said bluntly, "but I am not getting any younger either. I want to make sure everything is in order. The triple bar is going to you, Ethan and Helen, when I am gone. All of it, not just your 20 acres. I have had the papers drawn up legal and proper. You have earned it, both of you, 100 times over." Ethan tried to protest, but Martha cut him off. "Do not argue with me. My son has his own life in California. He has no interest in ranching, and he is doing well enough without an inheritance. You two are the closest thing to family I have here. I have watched you build a good life, raise good children, make this ranch prosper. I can rest easy knowing the triple bar will continue after I am gone." There were tears and arguments and eventually acceptance. The papers were signed, witnessed, made legal. Martha seemed relieved to have it settled. She lived 3 more years, long enough to see Samuel grow into a capable helper on the ranch, and Rose start learning her letters from Helen. One night, Martha simply did not wake up. She died peacefully in her sleep, which Ethan said was exactly what she would have wanted. They buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch she had loved, with a simple stone marker. The whole town turned out for the funeral. Pastor Williams spoke about her strength, her fairness, her generosity. Ethan gave a eulogy that had everyone in tears, talking about how Martha had been more than an employer. She had been family, and how everything he had, everything he was, owed something to her willingness to take a chance on a drifting cowboy years ago. After Martha's death, Ethan and Helen became the sole owners of the triple bar. It was a big responsibility, but they were ready for it. They ran the ranch well, earning a reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle. They were respected in the community, often called upon to help settle disputes or organize community events. Samuel grew into a fine young man, tall and capable, with his father's love of the land and his mother's quick mind. At 19, he started courting the daughter of a rancher from a neighboring property, a smart, pretty girl named Caroline who could ride and rope as well as any man. Rose, at 16, showed an interest in teaching. Helen had taught her to read and write and do figures, and Rose had taken to learning like a duck to water. She talked about maybe going to school in Prescott someday to get proper teacher training, and while the thought of her leaving made Helen's heart ache, she and Ethan were determined to support their children's dreams. One evening, sitting on the porch of the house they had expanded over the years into something substantial and comfortable, Ethan took Helen's hand. They were both in their 40s now, their hair showing threads of gray, their faces weathered by years under the Arizona sun. "Do you ever think about that day at the train station?" Ethan asked. "When you stepped off the train crying? All the time, Helen admitted. "Sometimes I still cannot believe how different my life turned out from what I expected. I came here to marry a man I never met, and I ended up with something so much better." "I think about it too," Ethan said. "I think about how I almost did not go into town that day. Robert was supposed to pick up the supplies, but he was feeling poorly, so I went instead. If I had not been there, if I had not seen you, if I had not stopped to ask if you were all right, everything would be different." "Do you believe in fate now?" Helen asked, echoing a question she had asked him years ago. "I believe we make choices," Ethan said slowly. "I chose to stop and talk to you. You chose to trust me. We chose each other again and again, every day since then. Maybe that is fate, or maybe it is just love. I do not know if there is really a difference." Helen leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the sun set over the canyon in the distance, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. "I love you, Ethan Pierce." "I love you too, Helen Pierce." They sat together as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had shone down on them that first night when Helen had lain in her small room off the kitchen, scared and uncertain but hopeful. She had hoped for a new life then, and she had found one beyond her wildest dreams. Years continued to pass. Samuel married Caroline in a ceremony that brought together families from ranches all over the territory. They built a house on a portion of the Triple Bar land and started their own family. Rose did indeed go to Prescott for teacher training and returned to open a small school in El Dorado Canyon, teaching the children of ranchers and miners and shopkeepers. Helen and Ethan became grandparents, first to Samuel and Caroline's twin boys, then to a daughter, then to more grandchildren from Rose when she eventually married a doctor who had come west to open a practice. The ranch house was often full of noise and chaos and laughter as grandchildren visited, played, learned the ways of the ranch from their grandfather. As they grew older, Ethan and Helen gradually turned more of the ranch work over to Samuel and the hands they employed. They had built the Triple Bar into one of the most successful operations in the territory, but they were content now to step back and let the next generation take over. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration at the ranch. It seemed like half the territory showed up to congratulate them. Ethan and Helen stood together, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, their friends and neighbors, and marveled at the life they had built from such an unpromising beginning. Late in the evening, when the party was winding down and the grandchildren were being tucked into beds throughout the house, Helen and Ethan walked out to the spot where their first little house had stood. They had long since torn it down and built something bigger, but they both still thought of it fondly. 30 years, Helen said softly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together. Best 30 years of my life, Ethan said. And I plan on at least 30 more. That would make us very old, Helen pointed out with a smile. I do not care. I want every minute with you I can get. They stood together in the darkness, holding hands as they had so many times before, and Helen thought about the young woman who had stepped off a train crying, lost and alone and terrified. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from another life. The woman Helen had become was strong, capable, loved and loving. She had built a home, raised children, created a legacy. And it all started because a kind cowboy had stopped to ask if she was all right and had truly listened when she told him her story. The final years of their lives were peaceful ones. They watched their grandchildren grow, saw the Triple Bar continue to prosper under Samuel's management, took pride in Rose's success as a teacher and the respect she earned in the community. They traveled a little, making a trip to California to see the ocean, another to Texas so Ethan could show Helen where he had grown up. But they were always happy to come home to Arizona, to the ranch, to the land they loved. Ethan died first, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73. It was as if his heart simply decided it was time to rest. Helen grieved deeply but without bitterness. They had had 48 years together, which was more than many people got. She lived for more years, surrounded by her family, still sharp-minded and active until the very end. When she died, quietly one afternoon while sitting in her chair watching her great-grandchildren play in the yard, she was buried next to Ethan on the hill where Martha had been laid to rest years before. The headstones stood together, marking 3 lives that had been intertwined in ways none of them could have predicted. Samuel and Caroline continued to run the Triple Bar, and when they eventually passed it on to their own children, the story of Helen and Ethan became part of the ranch's history. The mail-order bride who had arrived with nothing, saved by a cowboy who saw someone in need and chose to help. They had built something that lasted, not just a ranch but a family, a legacy of kindness and hard work and love. The little town of El Dorado Canyon grew and changed over the years, as all places do. But the story of Helen and Ethan remained, told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we are meant to be, and that true love is not about grand gestures but about choosing each other every day, through hardship and joy alike. In the end, Helen's journey west had not been a mistake or a tragedy, even though it had felt like both when she stepped off that train crying. It had been the beginning of the greatest adventure of her life, a love story that started with a simple act of kindness and grew into something that shaped generations. The Triple Bar Ranch still stands today, owned by descendants of Helen and Ethan, a testament to what 2 people can build when they choose love, work hard together, and never give up on their dreams. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the Arizona sun sets over the canyon painting the sky in impossible colors, you can almost see them there, the mail-order bride and the cowboy who saved her, still together after all these years, still in love, still home.